He walks through a forest of steel and glass, beneath towers that scrape the sky, glowing under the cold breath of artificial light. His ears are sealed with sound, his eyes glued to a screen. His spine straight, his pace measured. From a distance he looks alive, but something inside him is rotting quietly, slowly, without a scream, without a name. He doesn't know when it began, this quiet death. Maybe it was in the 1000th swipe. Maybe it was in the moment he started performing instead of living. He's not hungry for food. His fridge is full. He's not desperate for sex. His DMs are open. He's not begging for love. He gets reactions, attention, views, but none of it touches him. None of it reaches the furnace buried beneath the skin. He is starving, but not in the way the world understands hunger. Not for status, not for connection, not even for peace. He is starving for his soul. And he doesn't even know it. Because how could he? He lives in a world that feeds the body, flatters the ego, and silences the spirit. A world that taught him everything about money, success, and performance, but nothing about silence, pain, or meaning. A world that sold him comfort as salvation, while slowly carving out the core of who he is. He wakes up not to a calling, but to a screen. He doesn't rise, he scrolls. He doesn't move with fire, he floats through algorithmic fog. He doesn't ask why, he only asks, what next? And every night, when he lies down in his bed, surrounded by devices, rewards, and goals met, he still feels it. That echo, that hollowness, that aching whisper in his bones. Something is missing. And the most terrifying part is she's begun to believe this is normal, because no one around him is alive either. They're all smiling, all achieving, all self-optimizing. But behind the filtered skin and rehearsed success, they're empty too. Walking corpses in designer shoes, numb prophets in a temple of distraction. No one screams, no one cries, everyone just claps for each other's slow death. And so he doesn't question it. He obeys, he adapts, he conforms, and he doesn't even realize the cost. Because this is what they never told him. The soul does not scream when it's starving, it disappears. It doesn't rage against the machine. It doesn't bang its fists on the walls of the psyche. It simply retreats slowly, silently, until all that's left is a man who moves, talks, works, and even smiles, but feels absolutely nothing. A man so well adjusted to a sick world, he mistakes his numbness for strength. A man who thinks being unbothered means being unbreakable, when in truth, it means he's already broken, but not in the way the world sees, not in the dramatic fall or the public collapse. He is broken in the worst way, spiritually amputated, yet perfectly functional. A machine in a human skin. Efficient, pleasant, predictable, but not alive. He no longer dreams. He strategizes. He no longer feels. He analyzes. He no longer creates. He replicates. He doesn't rebel. He adjusts. He doesn't fall in love. He negotiates partnerships. And somewhere in the layers of rationality and routines, he forgets what it means to be wild, to be irrational, to be untamed, to burn. And this is the modern disease. Not poverty of wealth, but poverty of meaning. A spiritual drought that no productivity app, no weekend getaway, no gym membership can cure. Because you cannot heal what you refuse to feel. You cannot resurrect a soul you've abandoned. And you cannot awaken while clinging to comfort like a child clings to a blanket in the dark. Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And now we see it in the compulsive scrolling, the constant noise, the fear of stillness, the hatred of solitude, the desperate chase for applause. Because to be still is to feel the emptiness. To be alone is to meet a stranger living behind your own eyes. And most men would rather die than do that. So they drown it with dopamine, with porn, with ambition, with alcohol, with spiritual fluff disguised as enlightenment, with anything, everything except truth. And here is the truth. The emptiness will never leave until you stop running. Because it isn't the enemy, it is the messenger. It is the call. The same call that came to Moses in the desert, to Siddhartha under the Bodhi tree, to Christ in the wilderness. It is the divine hunger that awakens when the false world collapses. When the noise fades, and you finally ask, what am I doing here? Not here, as in your job or your city. Here as in this planet, this body, this time. Here as in this life. And when that question hits you, truly hits you not as an idea, but as an earthquake, you will fall to your knees. Not in weakness, in clarity. Because for the first time, you'll see the truth of your own starvation. Not of the stomach, of the soul. And that moment, that sacred breakdown is not the end. It is the beginning. It is the beginning of the only journey that ever mattered. Not the one that leads to success, not the one that earns applause, but the one that drags you, clawing and gasping, into the depths of your own being, where everything you've buried is waiting. Your rage, your fear, your shame, your brilliance. Not the polished version of you, the true one, the one you were before the world taught you how to perform, before you learned that survival meant shrinking, before you started trading authenticity for acceptance. You were not born to be lacked. You were born to be, fully, fiercely, unapologetically. But to become that man, to reclaim that fire, you must first walk into the shadows, not around them, through them. Jung called it the integration of the shadow, not the destruction of darkness, but the unification of light and dark within the self. Because without your shadow, you are only half a man. You are a smile without teeth, a prayer without fire. And so many men are stuck in this half state. Nice, polite, controlled, but beneath the surface, their unclaimed rage festers, their repressed dreams rot, their unlived lives haunt them in quiet moments. They may never say it out loud, they may never scream, but their eyes betray the truth. They are dying, not because they are bad, because they are incomplete. And the soul cannot thrive in fragments. So the only path forward, the only true path is the descent down into the self, down into the dark, not to be consumed, but to be reforged. Because deep in that abyss, beneath every scar, behind every fear, lies the furnace, the place where the man you were pretending to be burns away, and the man you are emerges, not softer, not safer, but sovereign, a man no longer driven by fear, a man no longer seeking validation, a man who remembers what it feels like to be alive. But make no mistake, this journey will cost you. It will cost you your illusions. It will cost you your comfort. It will cost you the version of you that was never real to begin with. But what you gain in return cannot be measured, cannot be marketed. It is not a mindset. It is not a hack. It is not a weekend retreat away. It is a resurrection, a spiritual reawakening in the ashes of your false identity. And once you've tasted that, once you've remembered the wildness in your own blood, you will never go back to sleep again. You will walk differently, speak differently, breathe differently, because now you are not driven by the world. You are moved by something deeper. You are fed not by attention, but by alignment. You are not chasing meaning. You are meaning. And from that place, unshakable, rooted, sovereign, you become untouchable. Because when a man becomes untouchable, in spirit not invincible, but inwardly sovereign, who no longer trembles before chaos, The world may still shout, tempt, distract, but it no longer owns him. His roots are deeper than opinion. His silence louder than noise. He doesn't flinch at rejection because he has already rejected the false version of himself. He doesn't chase validation because he's no longer starving. His soul, once malnourished by shallow applause, now feasts on clarity. There is nothing more ungovernable than a man who knows who he is beneath the armor, beneath the mask, beneath the names they gave him. You can't threaten him with exile because he already walked away. You can't manipulate him with shame because he made peace with his past. You can't use fear to control a man who has sat naked in the presence of his own darkness and came out with nothing to hide. He doesn't need to win debates or raise his voice to be heard. His stillness speaks louder than noise. His life becomes the sermon, his presence the revolution. The kind of man who doesn't need to announce his power because you feel it the moment he enters the room. This is when the shift happens. Not around him, but within him. He no longer tries to escape the fire, he becomes the fire. He stops asking life to be easier and begins to ask himself to be stronger. His mind sharpens, not through force, but through stillness. His words cut deeper, not because they're louder, but because they are true. He doesn't just think clearly, he sees clearly. Through people, through illusions, through himself. And in that vision, he no longer runs from discomfort. He embraces it. He no longer fears solitude. He welcomes it. He no longer reacts, he responds. Calm, clear, unshaken. And yes, the world may still reject him, but he's no longer asking for a seat at the wrong table. He builds his own, lives by inner law, guided not by trends, but by truth. He is no longer a reflection of the environment. He is the mirror that forces the environment to confront itself. That kind of man cannot be bought, cannot be broken, because he is already whole. And wholeness is the new rebellion. Not louder, not flashier, just deeply, soulfully real. Look around you. Look carefully. You'll see it everywhere once your eyes adjust to the truth. The man with a penthouse view and a dead gaze. The father who provides everything but is a ghost at the dinner table. The guy with 10,000 followers but can't spend 10 minutes alone without reaching for his phone like it's a life raft. He's not weak. He's starving. Not for more success, but for something real. Something ancient, something that doesn't flicker and vanish with the next trend. Watch how he smiles at parties charming, polished, rehearsed. But deep down, there's a question echoing in his bones. Is this all there is? That question never leaves. It whispers while he's stuck in traffic. It pulses when he wakes up before dawn and forgets why. It stings when he celebrates another promotion, but no one really knows him well enough to call. That's not burnout. That's not depression. That's disconnection from the self. Spiritual starvation wearing the mask of achievement. And the saddest part, he thinks he's a problem. He thinks he's broken because no one told him that his emptiness is not a flaw, it's a signal, a sacred alarm bell, a sign that his life has become too small for the size of his soul. And then there's the silent epidemic of men addicted to distraction, not because they lack willpower, but because reality has become unbearable without the false comfort of constant stimulation. They can't sit in a room with no music, no screen, no validation, because in that silence, the truth shows up. And the truth is this: they don't know who they are. They've become everything to everyone and nothing to themselves. They've been taught to perform instead of feel, to produce instead of reflect, to dominate instead of understand. And yet they wonder why they feel hollow after every win, every night out, every conquest. Because they've mistaken intensity for intimacy and adrenaline for meaning. Even the strong, silent ones, the ones who have it all together, carry it. You see it in the way they overwork, in the way they drink just enough to stay numb but not fall apart, in the way they can talk about stocks, cars, and politics, but go completely mute when asked, what do you believe in? Not the belief they were raised with, not the company values they recite, but what their soul believes. What they would stand for when the world burns, what they would die for if nothing else mattered. That kind of clarity doesn't come from comfort. It comes from collapse, from the brutal moment when a man finally says, I'm done lying to myself. And that moment is sacred. That's when the descent begins. Not into depression, not into failure, but into the self, into the fire, into the layers of identity that must be peeled back until only the core remains. And at that core, he doesn't find a motivational quote. He doesn't find a brand. He finds a mirror. And in that mirror is the boy who once dreamed without fear. The boy who played, built, created, and imagined not to impress anyone, but because it was his nature. And that boy still lives. But he's been buried beneath years of pretending, performing, and pleasing. The rebirth begins when the man dares to dig. Then let us continue, because once a man begins to dig, really dig, he finds what the modern world worked so hard to bury. Not just feelings, not just forgotten memories, but truth, raw, wild, uncompromising truth. The kind that doesn't fit on a resume, the kind that can't be monetized, the kind that burns through illusion like wildfire. And in that fire, something ancient stirs, something the system fears. A man who remembers his essence. He remembers what it felt like to wake up with wonder instead of dread. He remembers the nights he dreamt without limit, the afternoons he stared out the window thinking about meaning, not money. He remembers when art mattered more than algorithms, when questions mattered more than answers. And most painfully, he remembers that at one point, before the noise, before the expectations, before the performance, he felt everything deeply, vividly, truthfully, and it scared them. So they taught him to silence it. Don't be so sensitive. Man up. Stay focused. They told him that to be strong was to be numb, that to be successful was to be efficient, that to survive was to shut the door on his own soul. But now, with shovel in hand, he realizes those were not lessons. They were sedations, tools to tame the wildness in him. And now, as he excavates the truth, he begins to understand he was never broken. He was buried. And piece by piece, he unearths the sacred. The grief he never cried. The questions he was told not to ask. The rage he hid behind polite smiles. The passion he drowned in routine. The faith he traded for data. This is what it means to be reborn, not to become someone new, but to return to the self you abandoned to survive. And it is not gentle. It is not graceful. It is not clean. It is violent in the way lightning splits a tree. It is painful in the way old skin peels. It is sacred in the way fire purifies. But when the smoke clears, something remains a man who is no longer afraid to be whole. Not polished, not perfect, whole. A man who doesn't fear the dark because he has made peace with it. A man who doesn't crave attention because he has nothing to prove. A man who doesn't avoid silence because he has finally met himself and found a friend, not a stranger. This man doesn't need 20 rules for success. He doesn't need 10 morning habits. He doesn't need another productivity hack because he isn't starving anymore. His soul is fed. His mind is clear. His feet are grounded. And now, everything he touches carries the weight of authenticity. His relationships, his decisions, his words, they don't just echo, they resonate. Because they come from the furnace, not the filter. Then let us carry this all the way to the summit where the silence becomes symphony, and the man who once wandered in numbness now stands carved from fire and truth. Because once he remembers who he is once, he feeds the soul that he once starved everything begins to bend around him. Not because the world changed, but because he did. He no longer seeks to escape reality, he seeks to enter it, fully, fiercely, with eyes wide open and spine unbent. He doesn't wish for the storm to pass. He becomes the storm. Not chaotic, but sovereign. Not loud, but unmistakable. Now, his presence is no longer a plea, it's a declaration. Every breath he takes says, I am here. And I remember. I remember the boy I buried. I remember the truth I abandoned. I remember the man I was meant to become. And I have stopped running. I have stopped apologizing. I have stopped starving. I am not available for small talk, small thinking, small living. I am not available for a life that dishonors my soul. This is not ego. This is not arrogance. This is alignment. This is what happens when a man stops outsourcing his authority to systems that do not love him. This is what it looks like when a man claims his life with both hands, without shame, without compromise. He no longer needs permission. He is the permission. He no longer waits to be chosen. He chooses himself. He no longer plays by rules designed to keep him small. He writes in a language they were never meant to understand. And those who see it, who feel it, may not know what to call it. They may call him intense, or distant, or too much. But deep down, something in them remembers too. Something in them aches to return. Because one awakened man is a mirror that forces every sleeping soul around him to face their own starvation. He doesn't preach. He lives. He doesn't chase. He embodies. He doesn't dominate. He invites to rise, to awaken, to remember. And now, to you, the one listening, the one who knows this isn't just words, but a mirror being held up to your own soul, hear this. You are not lost. You are not broken. You are not too late. You are just hungry. And that hunger is sacred. It is not a curse. It is the call. Feel it, not with noise, but with truth. Not with image, but with essence. Not with escape, but with encounter. Because the world doesn't need more influencers. It needs more awakened men. And your soul, your wild, dangerous, sovereign soul, has waited long enough. Wake up, stand up, and become